So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
It wasn't obvious that I'd end up here, but I'm very much enjoying as you say, an advisory career at the moment. But I was thinking about this, answering this earlier on, and I think my career is really in four parts, or it's four completely different careers. So I started in the days of the Cold War in defence research until the Cold War ended, and then everybody in defence research was out looking for a job. I ended up in the internet industry at that point and had 10 fantastic years, sort of in the 90s, building or helping to build the embryonic stages of the internet, which was just a ridiculously exciting time, learning how to build something and scale something that is so incredibly massive, even in those days. And then this was around the time the bubble burst. Just before the bubble burst, I decided, well, it's time for my first startup. And then 25 years of doing startups at that point. And I can say that trying to raise money just as the bubble bursts is just an incredibly hard experience. But nevertheless, we got through it, we survived. So 25 years of that. And then really, at the moment, the last couple of years have been really focused on actually helping academics at universities spin out their research and turn them into businesses.
Brilliant. So I would say that's been a non-linear route into entrepreneurship. But let's just talk about that journey, and let's just talk about the key moments that shaped it. What are the moments that stand out to you on that journey?
Yeah, non-linear. That's a euphemism for a really poor start to a career, actually. Right at the beginning, I left school when I was 15, so me and school didn't get along. I hated school. It was such an awful school. It got knocked down a couple of years after I left it. It was a traditional, horrible state school. Anyway, it didn't get along with me. I didn't get along with it. I was awful at school, and no sob story, but a broken family, and I just couldn't see the point of learning. And so I left when I was 15. The school said, you should go, and I was so happy at that point. So age 15, I was thinking, okay, so what am I going to do? And my mum, bless her, she said, well, you're going to go and get yourself an apprenticeship. So I did. And I ended up working at Marconi, which is how I ended up getting into defence research. And it was really, in those early days, all of a sudden there were, I guess classically you would say, male mentors around, and I was thinking, okay, well, I kind of want to do what he's doing. And then the trouble really started, because actually what he was doing, he had a PhD, and I was thinking, and nobody in my family had ever been to university, and so I was thinking, how on earth do you do that? I've got no qualifications, and how do I do what he does? So anyway, I wanted a lot to do what he was doing. So I was really fortunate at the end of the apprenticeship that Marconi decided, well, they basically said to me, look, if you get your place at university, we'll sponsor you. So I was thinking, oh, right, okay. So I ended up with a pretty good university, did an engineering course, and then got back into Cold War research, and then the Cold War ended. But that, I guess, that was a really defining moment, was just learning to learn, having completely ignored the concept for most of my upbringing. So there was, I think that's probably the pivotal thing that sort of set me out on a path of being quite determined, actually, as all these changes came along, just to make sure that I could carry on going, I guess.
Sounds great. That sounds great. And now, obviously, today's event is focused on exit options. So I just want to hone in a little bit on your listing journey, how you took your company actual experience from founder, to that journey to actually list on AIM. So let's just talk about that. How did that happen for you? And was it potluck? What made you decide that was the route that you wanted to go down?
You mean the float?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was a surprise. So it was we floated early, and in fact I was pretty determined not to float at that point. I got to a point I had a couple of term sheets for VC type rounds. I was really pleased actually with the valuations. They were about right for that stage. And actually one of our biggest shareholder at that point, a company called IP Group, who invest in research-heavy spin-outs from universities, which we were, a research-heavy spin-out, there was a capital markets guy there, and he said, Dave, look, before you take that money, let me show you around the city. Give me a day. So he took me around the city, introduced me to all the moving parts of the city, on the buy side, on the sell side, and the broking side, and various other bits. And I was, to be honest, I was really impressed with them as individuals. And if you're a founder, you're talking to investors, and you kind of know the good questions and the not so good questions. Mm-hmm. And the really good questions, those are your investors. You want them because they have that sort of deeper insight. And they're often the really hard ones to answer, but they're the investors you're looking for. And actually, the quality of the investors I was talking to when I was moving around the public markets, I was super impressed. So actually, we went back to the board and said, how about actually we do this float now? And we were pre-profit, very early stage revenue, so it was early, but it actually worked out super well because we were actually signing up some of the world's largest companies to our business, and actually we needed lots of money, and we also needed the sort of robustness of the optics that a public market company can give you, which is the deep pockets of the city itself, plus all the corporate hygiene of being in the public market is obviously pretty attractive, or at least it makes it comfortable for big partners and big customers to work with you.
Interesting, that's great. So looking back on that journey, what were your biggest fears and concerns when you were scaling and going down to list on AIM, and did any of these turn out to be true?
Yes.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time about thinking about day zero through to, I guess there's a real pivot point in a startup's journey, which is when you get to this moment where your sort of minimum viable product, and I buy into the idea that a startup is actually almost the definition of a startup. It's an experiment to find a working business model. And so really the challenge around that moment when you decide to scale up is you have to have a fully working business model. And if only it was really easy to understand whether you had a fully working business model. And so many companies, I think, usually under the pressure of investors, will try and sort of scale up early or earlier than they should be before they've really got that business model working. And there's just a lot of pressure from VCs, public, where it doesn't really matter. It's quite natural because they can see some evidence that your business is working and think that, well, that's it. Just put more money in and go fast. Well, that's almost always fatal. And so having done a number of these startups, I really, really conscious that when we moved into the public markets that I would get this right, and I didn't get it right. And so, we'd landed some huge deals with some great companies. I mean, these were all household names. These were, deals were running at sort of anywhere between $1 million per annum to 2 or 3 million per annum. So actually, from the outside, it looked like, I was a genius. It was great. The whole thing was working. But actually, it wasn't yet at that product market fit. The whole business model wasn't really working, and my gut told me it wasn't. And yet, I kind of in the boardroom accepted that we should now press the accelerator and go faster. And actually, then we ran into some trouble and we had to pivot the business. Mm-hmm. Pivoting the business in the public market is incredibly painful to do. Investors really don't like it, and our share price moved accordingly. So actually, that was horrendously painful. So my greatest fear is, in fact, the thing that I ended up doing.
Pivoting in the public market.
Just accelerating too soon, yeah.
Okay.
Or just investors want you to sell. Sell. It's like, yeah, okay, but you've got to sell at the right time. So.
Indeed. So, I mean, you've spoken about that, but do you have any regrets, I would say, in that process leading up to, listing that exit for Actual Experience? And is there anything that you wish you'd done earlier? Anything you could have done differently?
I always come back to you, though, really, we touched on it, and the previous speaker touched on it, it's about people. Mm-hmm. And the importance of people, especially in these very sort of small-scale teams, mm-hmm. sort of growing very rapidly. Mm-hmm. And actually, the most important group of people is the leadership team itself. And my attitude to this was always, well, let's try and recruit the very best people we could possibly get. So I had sort of, it was like the Manchester City lineup, it was all these superstars across the board. And yet it turned out that I wasn't Pep Guardiola because I couldn't make them play like a team. And actually I had to sort of unpick half the team that refused to play as a team. They were absolutely brilliant individuals, and I love them dearly for it. But actually their ability to be part of a team was not anywhere near good enough, and I didn't appreciate that enough at the time. Now I do, and it took a while to get the team working. And actually, by the way, once the team was working, made up of, let's say, not quite as superstar players, but that once the team worked, the whole company worked way, way, way better than it did while we had the team not playing like a team. Yeah,
that's really good. So, from your experience, you've had highs, you've had lows. What advice would you give to anybody here who is, just thinking about their exit, their next move? What advice would you give them, especially those who want to list on AIM?
I think it's easier than it sounds. Actually, I was really daunted by it. Really intimidated. I was a kind of, with the sort of background I had, I thought, well, I'm never going to be a public market CEO ever. And yet that was the journey that was in front of me. And so when it came to it, I was incredibly nervous for at least the first year or so actually into the public markets before I started to settle down and realize, actually, do you know what? I can do this. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is a lot easier than it perhaps looks from the outside if you haven't actually done it. And I think two things really worked fantastically well, which I probably hadn't appreciated they were going to quite as well. Raising money on the public markets is a lot easier than raising money in the private markets. In the sense that you sort of have to be a genius in the private market because you have to think about 9 months ahead, plan your fundraise, and nobody can really see 9 months ahead. So you don't really know where you're arriving at the fundraising point at the right moment. You could be a long way out. Whereas in the public markets, the things that make private market funding take that long are, the corporate hygiene, the diligence, and the price. And actually that's all sorted in the public markets. So you do have to put some effort into speaking to investors a lot in the public markets, and doing the tours of the city and speaking to your investors regularly. But the point is, they're all like cocked guns. They're ready to go. The price is set, diligence is set. They're really just waiting for you to say, yeah, I'm going to need to raise money. And actually, the whole process works really quickly. So you don't need to be a genius anymore about thinking 9 months ahead. It's more like a few weeks. If you really wanted to go fast, you could raise money in weeks. Although that would be quite pushed, but it's possible. And the other thing is just, if you're in the public markets, it's a lot easier to convince. We had companies in the world's top 20 largest companies in our partnership and customer base. So, they actually would look through and go, oh, well, you're on the London Stock Exchange, and that just counts for a lot. And compared to, we're a small company, but compared to a small company not on a public market, that actually made our lives actually a lot easier.
That's great, and you're the first person I've ever heard say that it's easier to raise money on the public markets than the private market. So that's saying something. You are the first.
Well, yeah, I'm not trying to say it's easy. But
easier.
I think if you're really receptive to the advice that you're given, then you can work with investors in the way that the public market would have you work with the investors and communicate well, then actually it's which is not easy, but it's we were able to raise a lot of money at just about the right time when we needed to. So for me, it worked really well.
Dave, thank you so much. Dave.